Okay, so here we have the game that decided the candidates. Oops. The game that decided the candidates. Round one, Nepo versus Giri. Because Giri was the runner-up to Nepo. And this was basically the game that decided, because if Giri won this game, like Giri lost and he played white. If he won this game, he would have been the one. If everything else had continued the way it would, he would have been the one that would have advanced the to challenge Magnus Carlsen. So even though it's round one, it was a really important game, and you always have to make sure that you're constantly at your on your A game, and that you try and maintain a consistent manner in how you play tournaments. Because even though there's 14 rounds, the first round matters just like every other round. So we have knight f3 from Giri, and knight f6 from Nepo, and we have a symmetrical game with c4, and then we have d4 being played. And this is a pretty even position, not a lot. Kind of a Sicilian, but instead of e4, it's c4. So it's very symmetrical. So you have takes, bringing your knight to the center, but you know that's not really going to do anything. You do open your d file, but black has two center pawns, white has one. White has the open d file and brought his knight to the center. e6, g3. With this pawn on c4, it's really hard to develop your bishop this way. So you kind of wanted to bring it to g2 in order to make it active. And I mean, if you're white, you don't want to wait until he plays d5, so that maybe you can bring it to d3. You'll just play g2, and you'll have some long-term pressure down this diagonal. We have queen b6 from black. Just one second. And queen b6 from black. So obviously, let me just do this. The knight and the queen are putting pressure on this knight, so it could be defended, but there's pressure on the b2 pawn. What the heck? Let me just... There we go. So you could defend it with the bishop, but the b2 pawn would be taken. You can move the knight, but you could defend with the pawn, but I wouldn't want to... I don't think white wants to welcome any more trades, because this would be just more equalizing. Just like in principle, when you trade more pieces, that's less pieces you can attack black with, and there's less potential for getting a great advantage. So you kind of have to move this knight if you want to have a real chance at winning if you're white. So you play knight b5, and now there was knight b3, but then you had bishop here and threatening to double the pawns. So if you play bishop d2, well, that's just a passive position, and black gets to expand and develop quickly. Knight f3 is a concession because you've now made 3 moves with your knight, and it's not really doing anything here. And now 3 pieces have been developed. About to develop the bishop and castle, and black is going to be having faster development. When a piece is being attacked, you kind of don't want to bring it to the same square it was before. You kind of want it to bring it to b5, b3, or c2. One of those squares would be best. c2, it might not be that bad of a move, because you could bring it to e3, and you could have extended control over d5, and that's a crucial pawn break for black. But it's also kind of passive, because you could, it's on c2, so it's not really the best position possible. And you could have moves like these where you have to defend, and the b2 pawn gets taken. And if not, you're just doubling your pawns, which is, that's just ugly. So c2 is out, b3 is out. The only option is b5, and you have knight e5 because you want to pressure the c4 pawn, and you also kind of want to be able to, I think, for 2 reasons. One, there's a threat right now to check, and then when the bishop takes, you take, prevent black from castling, and you're cramping this pawn down. So what this move does is that it attacks c4, and it allows the queen to defend d6, so that you can play pawn d6, develop your bishops, and castle. So that's a really cool move. And we see bishop f4, targeting this knight, saying you gotta defend this knight. It's out in the center, hanging. And if you take, well, there's a nasty little this from white, and there's, I mean, that actually this might look like a good move, but it's just attacking. I think this, just a fork, would be fine. You have here, and then you just simply take the rook, and black cannot take because there's a current threat here. And if you do try and continue down this line, you take with check. And then after it goes back, take with the rook, and you're up a piece. So we can't have knight takes c4. He needs to defend it with knight f to g4, which is insane, because now you have two knights that are hanging. When you have two knights when you have a knight protecting the other one, and this knight is not protected by anything, like, they protect each other, but if you attack them with a pawn, one of them moves and the other gets taken. This looks like a very vulnerable position, but the problem is that, like, the cool thing about this move is that it defends, but it also threatens check on f2. It won't be checkmate, but it's, and also knight takes f2, and that won't be pretty for white, so white has to defend it with e3. And now we can actually have a form of defense for the knights by first kicking this knight out, and then white wants to kick this knight out, and they trade off knights in the most, comical, it's a funny way, because you're just on the side. You're like, I'll take this side, you take that side, okay. And let's analyze the structure. We have double isolated pawns. We have this double pawn, but it does control some nice squares. Open up the h file. This opens up the a file. And I think white structure is a little bit better, because double isolated pawns is worse than this one, because there's f3 that can defend, and it is doing some work. I don't feel like this is much of a threat, because I could take, well, it's black's turn to move, but I don't feel like this is going to do much. But he takes with the knight, so that's important, because the knight was under attack and you wanted to capture this pawn as well. So instead of taking the pawn, you take with the knight. Rook c1. We don't get, I don't think we could get knight, like, knight takes b2 is available, but the thing is that the queen develops and you have to move this knight to protect it, and then if you move it here, well, you just have takes, and then you have pressure on the rook, and if the rook moves, we have check. Like, if the queen stays undefended, we have check and we take the queen, and if the rook tries to defend, well, we'll just take it, or even better, we'll actually play here, and this queen is trapped. And you could have check, but this queen has nowhere to go because of the rook, crucially on the c file. So knight takes b2 is not an option. We have d5 clamping down on c4, which I think is good for black. This is a good outpost for him. Now, even though it's double isolated, it's doing a lot of work and provides a lot of space for black on the queen side, and white doesn't really have anything on the king side, so I think black is better. We have b3 trying to kick the knight out, gain control over this outpost. It is very annoying, and now this is a real threat, because once the knight comes back, it can be recaptured by the d pawn. And then we have a threat here. If white takes, well, we have rook. Well, actually, white did take, and we will see in the following line that, like, after takes, the rook comes down, and this cannot be defended with a pawn. And you will see white try and defend on e5, but f6 and e5 can be played, and eventually the piece will be regained by black. And because more pieces are being traded on the queen side, the pawns which are connected past pawns, have more ability to do some damage. So we have f6, and then we have the queen here. Now you have to get the queen involved to protect this piece, or not. Like, if you did, you would witness this. This would be trapped, and a bishop here, here, and this is just not a pretty pawn structure for. You would actually witness here, here. Like, the thing is, if you try and defend, you're gonna lose both pieces because this bishop will be trapped and this knight will be trapped. So you'll be down a piece, which is not good. So we have f6, queen f5, bishop e2. Take it, take everything. And interestingly, he does not take. White, who is Giri, does not take, because if we see take, we're gonna see the capture come with check, and then he can take here, and black is just doing way better. And this rook has nowhere to go. If he takes, white is gonna take that way. Actually, like, when white moves his king here, if he takes, I think the line is bishop takes, pawn takes, and then some potential pressure on b6 and also on h7, which is pretty cool. And if g6 is played, you can capture that. So I think the fact that you it's either losing the dark square bishop. Oh, I turned the engine on. It's either using the dark square bishop to capture and lose it, or the light square bishop. And I think the dark square bishop was being more active, so he wanted to get out of the potential check. We have b5, now protecting, and if white were to capture, he would take and have a passed pawn. So we have, again, doesn't need to take. It's a crazy position, but this rook has nowhere to go, and he doesn't want to sacrifice his dark square bishop. It's very active. Now he takes after it's forcefully trapped. And we have, interestingly, we don't have takes, because I think we would have queen takes, and this pawn is going to be hard to defend against. And this bishop is pretty good at defending some key squares. Like if we had here, it's pretty good defense. And yes, he could advance here, but this is a threat to eventually queen. So we don't see queen takes, we see pawn takes first, and the queen comes here to defend a2, c2, and potentially, once this captures, if black captures, white captures, and black tries to promote, you can do a bunch of checks. Well, you can actually come back and take it, but if black tries to advance and promote, white has some checks in reserve just in case he gets into trouble. So we have queen here to defend, and also anticipating pressure on the c file, anticipating it to open up, and potentially, if this captures, this pawn will be defended, and that is a great move in my opinion, because white wants to take, but cannot, because now access to h7 is blocked off, and you're stuck defending the square.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Whoa. That was not my intention. Now white would be stuck putting his queen on c1. He can't put his queen anywhere else because then the pawn would promote. So we see a great move, queen here, in anticipation of that, so they can capture the crucial pawn and attack here. And then now, even though black has some space, he is opening up his king, and white's king is more defended. So I think that's what he's going for here. But then we have b5. Wow, just look at this weird position. And if we see takes, well, now the queen's eyes are opening up, and he's defending. Like, white could take, and then after that, there would be a connected pass pawn, and the center is just ginormous for black. And if white takes, well, now we have black seeing his pawn and being able to defend it. So again, he's like saying, take both ways, I don't care, I want to defend it as much as possible. If you take this way, well, I could now just advance, and you can't really do anything about it. I want my queen to defend the pawn. as much as possible. And again, if we see queen capture, we will see some, we will actually see the bishop come here, and look at that skewer. We could have queen check here. Obviously there needs to be a trade. This rook needs to get out of the way, so let's say hypothetically here. You've got pawn here and nothing, and the pawn cannot be stopped. That queen is crucial to stopping the pawn, and so after b5, that pawn needs to be what's it called? Gotten rid of. So ginormous center, good pawn structure for black. White needs to attack it, so you make a move that forces a pawn break. Black has a decision to attack, to advance, or to just defend it. And we see the capture coming from black. Now this pawn is isolated. It's easier to handle. Interestingly, he doesn't take. I think that he fears maybe the center is just too good for black. I have no idea. I genuinely don't know, because you could actually come here and clamp down on this structure, and then you could play here and do something with the king. Like, you could do something with the king. You could not castle, but you could play here, go here, and then you could checkmate with that bishop on f3. So I don't know. Really good, really good prospects for black. But okay, we see rook here because maybe there's some potential lines like this, and maybe he thinks that capturing this pawn will do no good. So he captures the double pawn on e4. We see the capture here, and we see the opportunity, him trying to pressure the white queen away from the bishop, and well, it's being defended, but this queen is running on short fumes, and I don't know why he went here. He captured the bishop, allowing the capture of the queen, and then come back. But I don't know why he didn't play queen to a4. Maybe anticipating the check, and then possibly queen here might be the issue, because then after this, no, not queen there. That just, you could potentially see here, and then queen check, and then here, and then I don't know. I don't know what would be the lines here. Why white is scared of playing queen to a4. Let's turn on the engine. We have what's it called? So black is slightly better, obviously, but we would have the attack here, and now he has to go back, and we have attack on the rook. So that's the issue. It would be harassed by the light square bishop. The queen would run out of squares to defend it, and the rook is now running out of squares to defend the bishop. So less crucially important to keep your minor pieces glued to a pawn. Outposts are so important, and just avoid a lot of unnecessary issues. We see the capture because a bishop and a rook is better than, for a queen, is better than, like, losing your queen for a bishop and a rook. You have higher drawing chances than losing an exchange, because in this such an open position like this, the rook is just much better. So then we have a bunch of checks. So the king is going to advance, try and help out. So now we have a change in the pawn structure. So right now, black's goal is to get a passed pawn and win the game. But we have a pawn taken. And white here is defending, right? The threat is a fork. The threat from black is a fork if white takes. Black is saying, take this pawn, I'm going to fork you, and white says, you know what? You can take it. I'm going to maintain a stronghold on the position. Basically building a fort so that you can't get through. I'm going to make such a defensive position that you can't advance this pawn. I'm going to have two pieces trained on the square, and I'm going to protect my king with my rook. And black is going to get this pawn later, but we will see if this defensive stance holds or not. So we have... So black has advanced his king as much as he can. And now he is advancing it back because he's trying to get the pawn. And now he's moving it back to the center. So that's pretty cool how you just had your queen on the side defending and just maneuvering your king to get the pawn. And now we see the reallocation of the king around to try and come this way and block potentially, because then you'd have here pawn takes, you'd have king here, then king here controlling this square and this square, and then you have check, and then you have king e1, and then you can come to c2 and execute the promotion of the pawn. So that is what the plan is, and we see resign from here, because let's say hypothetically white wanted to just, you know, stay. Let's say he doesn't want to take the queen. You know, what are you gonna do? Well, he's just gonna bring his king around. That's what he's gonna do, regardless whether he takes. That's the goal. The point of queen d3 is to bring the king around, to block the rook so that he can bring the king around. And if the rook takes, then black is going to promote. So that's something that gave black the win, because if hypothetically he said, you know what, I don't need to take, and there wouldn't be this possibility of promoting, then white would maintain the draw. But like, let's say hypothetically you have rook here, you could just advance, and now you're just threatening, you're just threatening to win at this point with queen f3. Like, let's say it goes back, or no, not even goes back, let's just say here you could actually take, and then you could have here, and this pawn is promoting no matter what with check. And then you have queen here, and if it advances, you just have the win. So that's a pretty cool game. Lots of key moments. That c pawn and queen guarding it, black was holding on to that pawn, and that did give him an advantage and allowed him to win. I think that was very instructive. There was no castling in this game, which is insane. Neither player castled. That is a rarity in tournament chess, where we don't see any player castle. We see king to f1. No player castled. Oh wait, no, we do. Never mind. We see black castling, but white did not castle, and black right after castling got his king to the center. We see here. It's just strange how. So we see castling, but on what move? We see it on move 28 from black. That's how long it takes, which is crazy. But that's the decisive game of the candidates. Nepo played really well. Giri he underestimated the C file. He just underestimated the power of the C file for black and lost the game. Yep. And that was the most crucial game, in my opinion, of the candidates. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you later.